Well, for all that we'd like to do, we have a limited amount of time today because another group is coming in at 3:30. So we decided what we're going to do is spend most of the time on the channeling, focus on that, and the focus
you
in the...
talk to ETs, right?
And the focus in the channeling, and this is how Nicollette usually likes to do her channelings, is to allow you to ask questions. We never know which entity or entities, because often there's more than one blended, are going to speak through her. They're the ones that make the decision according to the group that's present for any particular channeling. And they know what's most appropriate based on what is on people's minds. So
Not
they
that
may...
you won't be shocked and surprised. They know you can handle it.
We wanted to say a little bit about how Nicollette got into channeling in the first place and about her ET contacts. And I'll let you show this picture and you can tell about that.
Well, this is Sal. That's short for a name I cannot possibly pronounce. And his race, again, another name I couldn't possibly pronounce, so I didn't even bother. There's only about, I don't know, about between 200 and 3,000 of them left in physical. They're starting to go into the non-physical. And so they're on board ship. They don't have a planet anymore. And they go around and teach children like myself, starseeds, and other specially equipped in mind children ET languages so that we can later in the future be ambassadors so that we can help people communicate between ETs and us. I don't remember these languages yet, but I'm being told that I will eventually just remember these languages that I've taught. Not the only child he's taught. I show this picture because this one is not something that everybody sees in your books and stuff. You know, not everybody has reported this. I guess this contact with these beings are pretty rare.
You want to pass this around?
Yeah, everybody's more than welcome to enjoy.
Is that an artist rendering?
That's an artist rendering. The artist is Kansara. The head is a little smaller than actual. The head is actually larger. The neck is a little longer, and the fingers, the metacarpals between the thumb and the two fingers is actually much longer, almost twice or 3 times longer than that. But that is what she got. She channels this art as well as asking me questions as to what it looked like. Pretty soon she started saying, you know, oh, this is what it looked like. I'm like, how do you know that?
Do you want to tell the story briefly, if possible, about
briefly,
your contact?
I had a hypnosis done by Barbara Lamb, who is well known in the neopology field. I remember seeing 2 gigantic crows the size of dinosaurs when I was 6 years old, and I ran screaming to my grandmother. Giant crows were outside, and she had told me to come on in for dinner because it was dinner time. And as far as to my knowledge, I had just went out after lunch. So after seeing the giant crows, I had some obvious missing time. So I had that memory of the giant crows. I confirmed it with my grandmother later in my life, and then I went ahead and had hypnosis of that situation. What was actually happening was I was in the orchard playing with mud pies, and I heard or knew or felt, I'm not quite sure, I just suddenly turned around and there was a black UFO, saucer type, coming through a plasma field, if you will, that was kind of going around, and it looked just like an Independence Day, clouds and lightning and everything. And it was huge, absolutely huge. This thing hadn't been, you know, for a 6-year-old, it's really kind of hard to estimate, but had been at least a mile across, if not 2 or 3. It was a very large ship, very, very low to the ground. Parked over ahead of me, the little silvery light picks me up, and that being was in it. And as soon as he touched my hands with his 2 fingers, I immediately went calm. I was terrified until that moment. On board, I remember him teaching me language on what looked like a digital screen, but it's not quite the same as your alarm clock, but that's kind of what it looks like, you know, some red letters on an alarm clock like dial. The ship is alive. I knew I could talk to the ship. As soon as I got on board, I ran to the chair because I knew that the chair would spin upon my command telepathically. I remembered that I'd been on the ship before. I remembered that my relationship with this entity was very, very pleasant, and I loved this being a lot. Can't say that I have ship now. Okay, give me a second. Anyway, so Anyway, so tell me languages on this ship. I've also had military abductions. Through hypnosis, I found that I was being taken from my military housing, from my parents' home, and it was in the hypnosis that we figured that the military housing has sensors, so that if you get abducted while you are in military housing or on a military base, the military is going to find out about it. And so then they started abducting me because they want to know what ETs did with you, which ET group you're dealing with, and what's their agenda, and what are they telling you, what are they teaching you, what powers are they giving you, what technology do you know about, and so on and so on. So then I suffered a great deal of trauma in my childhood because of that, because they were not very nice about obtaining that information. I do have some flashback memories about that. Needless to say, I had a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder as I was growing up. Of course, they didn't know what that was. They didn't know what the cause of my behavior problems were, so they thought I was manic depressive.
Speak loudly so people in the back.
Oh yes, I get quiet sometimes.
If she gets too quiet, just speak up in the back if you're having trouble hearing.
So I had to deal with that, and then I went through personal healing. That's how my channeling got started, is that I was so messed up as a kid that I knew that I had to do whatever I had to do to get my head straight. And so at one point, I realized the psychiatrists weren't going to help me that much. A lot of the psychiatrists that I was talking to said, you know the therapeutic principles and how to do it, so you're pretty much good enough to handle this on your own. So they were saying, no, you need to go to them anymore. But I still felt very confused and very lost. So while I was on a ranch with a friend of mine, we found a vortex, a ley line crisscrossing point, which was a healing area of land. And so we went into that, and I decided that I wanted to have a two-way conversation with God. And if he was out there, then I thought that, if I talked to him, then he should talk back, because otherwise, what's the point of a one-way conversation? It doesn't make sense to me. So I wanted to have a two-way conversation. And I also wanted to have all my issues in my head healed. And that's when my journey began. That's when my channeling began. I had contact when I was a kid that I am now realizing is channeling, or at least telepathic communication, but at the time I thought it was just a really vivid fantasy world that I had as a kid. Strangely enough, one that I couldn't change. When you're playing like a kid, you can change the fantasy. If you didn't like how it turned out, you can start over and change it. I couldn't change this one. It was like a soap opera, and I couldn't change this fantasy. And it was about a world and them dealing with hidden technologies from the government and all these other things that we're now dealing with now. And I was like, now I realize that this story was some sort of preparation of information that I would need later on in my life. So now I look back at that story as information. So in a sense, I've been channeling since I was a child. I also, my mother told me that I had told her that I was an ET and that I had replaced her daughter at the age of 2.
Wow.
At the age of 2, I basically came up to her and said, I'm not your kid. You're not my mom. And so that's an interesting thing that also happened. I've always felt like I'm kind of this person on the outside looking in, wondering what in the heck is wrong with these humans. Don't worry, I've gotten over it. You're all fine. But anyway, so that's kind of my story in a nutshell as quickly as I can wrap it.
Okay. So
long story.
As Nicollette says, she was a channel from childhood, but she didn't realize it was channeling. And then also at a certain point, tell just briefly again about the God, how you developed your relationship with God.
Well, like I said, I basically kind of did a Neil Donald Walsh, my life sucks, you're at fault, and I want to know why. And, if you're out there and if you're real, then I should be able to hear your voice. I should be able to know that it's you. And I went through a process of testing to make sure that this voice was really who it said it was. And got to a point where I trusted it after about a year. And so I had that conversation with God for about 2 years prior to meeting Greg. I wasn't into metaphysics and UFOs and conspiracy and all that other stuff back then. I just wanted to get my head straight. I knew there was something very wrong with the world, but I didn't know quite how I was supposed to fix it. But I also knew that I was supposed to fix it somehow. And so then a friend introduced me to Greg, and Greg is a researcher in channeling. He has researched just about every channeling that's ever been out there, and developed some, very strong opinions about the different types of channeling. And so when we met, we were on the, well, you can tell about the bliss thing.
Okay, well, as soon as I was spending time with Nicollette, I noticed that every so often she would be saying something eloquent that seemed to come from somewhere else, not from her conscious knowledge, and I recognized that that was channeling. It was just that she wasn't aware she was channeling and had never actually worked to formally train herself as a channel. But I pushed her to do that, so we sat down with the tape recorder and said, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can get somebody to speak through you. And right away, entities were speaking through her, and she was channeling extremely well, like she had been doing it for a long time, and I guess probably in past lives she has. And of course, as a child, she was doing her form of channeling and her conversation with God before I started working with her. I'd been involved with studies of channeling, ufology, and the paranormal for many years, and so I had all kinds of questions about these subjects, and I found excellent answers were able to come through the various entities that were speaking through her. And again, that's what we're going to do today, is let you ask these same kinds of questions. Regarding the book that we have copies of in the back, this Who's Who in UFOs and ETs, there was a list that was put out on the internet, it must be about 10 years ago from now, that Richard Boylan posted this list. He said it came from an anonymous posting on the internet called Ufologies, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And the list, it listed almost 100 individuals and said which, in the field of ufology, and told which ones were telling the truth, which ones were disinformers, which ones were hoaxers, and which ones were trying to tell the truth but were simply confused. That was the ugly category. So Nicollette and I and a friend of ours, Chuck, were using this list to help us, find out who to trust and who not to trust. And as we were asking about various people or looking them up on the list, Nicollette would start bringing through information from her entities about the same people. And we soon realized that she could give us even much more extensive information than what was on Richard Boylan's list. So we started doing our own list, and eventually it got quite large, and we put it out on the internet anonymously because we were afraid of how people would respond to that, especially where we were naming disinformers. And sure enough,
so far, no disinformer has ever faced off with us.
Well, I will, because you got me in there.
I know it.
I don't think it's funny.
You know you get a free copy if you're in the book, right?
Well,
You know you get a free copy if you're in the book.
yeah, I don't think it's funny. And if you think I'm going to just forget about it, I'm not.
no, we welcome anybody. Now, understand that what's in the book is not our opinion, it's
No, but
an entity's opinion.
I know, but honestly, hand on heart, the things that is written about me, I'm not commenting on anybody else. What's written about me in that book is absolutely 100% false. Now, if